The secret school never told you is this. They don't need you to think. They just need you to obey long enough to forget how not to. I was never punished for being wrong. I was punished for asking why one too many times. That's when I realized this wasn't education. It was training. Memorize. Repeat. Stay inside the box. Raise your hand. Ask permission. Don't challenge. Don't disrupt. Don't think too much. They called it discipline, but it was something else. It was fear, dressed in routine. Fear of chaos. Fear of originality. Fear of the unknown. The system isn't failing. It's functioning exactly as it was designed to. Schools were never built to raise independent thinkers. They were built to manufacture predictability, mass obedience, quiet compliance. A child who questions is a problem. A child who conforms is a success. I remember the moment I stopped trusting the system. I had asked a teacher why we were learning something, and she said, "Because it's in the syllabus." No reasoning, no purpose, just repetition. That's when I saw the mask slip. Most people stop asking questions by age 12, not because they lose curiosity, but because they're taught it's dangerous. I wasn't exceptional. I was simply unwilling to forget. So I left. Not the building, but the script. I started thinking outside their framework. Books, experiments, physics, coding, mistakes, and slowly, I built a brain that didn't need permission to function. If any part of this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like school taught you how to obey but never how to think, then you're in the right place. This is Mind of Musk. Like, share, and comment below if this spoke to something you've always felt but never voiced. And don't forget to subscribe. We're not just making videos. We're unlearning the lies, one thought at a time. I used to think I was the problem. When you're the only one asking questions, it's easy to believe you're broken. But it wasn't me. It was the environment. It was the reward system. In school, the currency isn't truth. It's compliance. Say what they want, how they want it, when they want it, and you're praised. Step outside the pattern, and you're labeled disruptive. I started noticing the pattern early. The best students weren't the most curious. They were the ones who followed instructions with robotic precision. They knew how to give the right answers, not because they understood, but because they memorized the format. If you gave a better answer in the wrong format, you lost points. If you challenged the premise of the question itself, you were ignored. That's when I realized school doesn't reward thinking. It rewards mimicry. There's no incentive to discover new ideas, only to reproduce the old ones. That's not education. That's mass training. And the dangerous part is, it works. It produces people who stop questioning, who follow authority by habit, who fear standing out more than being wrong. That's the real function of school, not to elevate your thinking, but to confine it within acceptable boundaries, to teach you that survival means blending in, to mold your curiosity into a script someone else wrote. I saw kids who used to love asking why slowly retreat into silence, not because they stopped caring, but because they learned it cost too much. A lower grade, a scolding, a label. You don't need a prison to suppress someone. Just teach them that their thoughts are dangerous. Just reward them for being invisible. I remember a science assignment where I tried to solve a problem a different way. I was told I made it too complicated, that it didn't fit the rubric, but the answer worked. That didn't matter. What mattered was that I didn't follow the expected steps. That was the moment I understood. Conformity is the hidden curriculum. It's not printed in the syllabus, but it's enforced every day, through tests, through structure, through silent glances and social pressure. You don't have to say don't think. You just have to reward repetition. Eventually, kids get the message. They trade wonder for approval, curiosity for permission, and no one has to force them to obey. They'll do it themselves. That's the genius of the system. It doesn't just condition behavior, it installs belief. The belief that the answer is already written, that success means fitting the mold, that asking too many questions is a flaw. But if you want to build something new, you can't think like that. You can't fit a blueprint that was never designed for visionaries. You have to unlearn the rules before you can imagine beyond them. And that's where I started. Not by adding more knowledge, but by deleting the lies. I wasn't punished for being wrong. I was punished for thinking differently. There's a difference. Wrong means you missed the answer. Different means you questioned the question. And in school, questioning the question is the real crime. I remember being told to stay on track every time I tried to approach a problem from another angle. Not because I was disruptive, not because I was off topic, but because I made the room uncomfortable. When you try something new, people don't see possibility. They see risk. They see deviation. And school is terrified of deviation. It needs things to be predictable, graded, scored, controlled. Initiative breaks that. It makes authority feel irrelevant. I learned that early. Initiative gets mistaken for arrogance. Creativity gets mistaken for rebellion. Independence gets mistaken for disrespect. And once they label you, it sticks. You're no longer the kid who wants to explore. You're the problem they want to contain. I saw this happen not just to me, but to everyone who colored outside the lines, students who challenged the method, who built things their own way, who asked too many questions. They were marked off. Not officially, but socially, quietly. They were isolated, talked down to, excluded from praise. And they learned the rule. Keep your head down. Do it their way. Even if it's wrong, even if it's pointless, even if you know there's a better way. You trade vision for acceptance. You bury initiative to survive. That's the unspoken cost of school. Not just boredom, not just repetition, but the systematic killing of initiative. The slow erosion of that internal spark that says, what if we tried something different? That question makes systems nervous, because initiative isn't something you can standardize. It can't be measured, boxed, or graded. But it can build rockets. It can start revolutions. It can solve problems the system doesn't even see, which is exactly why the system tries to suppress it. I don't blame the teachers. Most of them were trained by the same machinery, taught the same rules, punished for the same disobedience. They're not bad people. They're just stuck inside a system that mistakes control for order and obedience for learning. But some part of me never let go. Even when it got me in trouble, even when it meant isolation, I couldn't stop asking, what if there's a better way? What if we're all just repeating a bad pattern because no one was allowed to break it? That's what initiative really is. Not rebellion, not ego, just the refusal to pretend everything's fine. Just the courage to say, maybe it's not. And once you say that, you can't unsee it. You can't go back. You start noticing all the places where obedience is demanded not because it's right, but because it's easy, safe, predictable. And then you face the choice, fit in or forge your own path. Most people choose comfort. I didn't, because I wasn't afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of being told how to think. There's a difference. There's a big difference between being taught and learning. School teaches you what to think. Learning teaches you how to think. One is passive, the other is personal. In school, you wait for instructions. In learning, you build your own path. I noticed that early. The moment I stopped expecting school to teach me anything useful, I started teaching myself. And that's when everything changed. The questions got bigger, the answers got harder. But for the first time, they felt real. No one assigned me physics problems. No one told me to read the Encyclopedia Britannica. I just couldn't stop asking how things worked. why the world was the way it was, why no one seemed to care that so much of it didn't make sense. In school, I memorized what they told me. At home, I explored what they didn't. That's when I learned the truth. School is an institution. Learning is a decision. School trains you to pass. Learning prepares you to build. School gives you tests with answers. Life gives you problems with none. In school, you're rewarded for giving back what they gave you. In learning, you're rewarded for creating something new. I wasn't anti-school. I was anti-waiting. Waiting to be told. Waiting to be graded. Waiting to be allowed. That's what schooling is. Waiting for permission. For structure. For validation. I didn't want any of that. I wanted to understand, not for a grade, not for applause, just because the questions wouldn't stop. And once you start learning like that, for yourself, by yourself, the whole game changes. You start seeing the difference between effort and purpose, between being busy and being curious. You realize that a straight-A student might never have had an original thought. That discipline without direction is just obedience in disguise. The system pretends that learning and schooling are the same. They're not. One makes you ready for the world. The other makes you ready to comply with it. And the deeper I went into real learning, the more I saw how shallow school had been. It taught me how to sit still, not how to solve, how to recite, not how to reimagine, how to perform, not how to think. I didn't need more lectures. I needed better questions. I didn't need more answers. I needed problems worth solving. So I gave myself those problems. I sought them out. I failed a lot. But that failure was different. It didn't humiliate me. It informed me. That's what real learning does. It humbles you, breaks your assumptions, rebuilds you from what's true, not what's easy. And it never ends. Because the moment you stop asking why, you stop building. You stop evolving. You start waiting again. I never wanted to wait. Not for education, not for permission, not for the world to catch up. So I kept learning, not for a diploma, but for direction. There comes a point when unlearning isn't enough. You can strip away the lies. You can rewire your thinking. But if the people around you are still trapped in the system, you're building alone. And eventually, you ask a deeper question. What if we could build a new system altogether? That's where Ad Astra came from. Not from ambition, from frustration, from watching my own kids start to walk into the same machine I spent years escaping, from realizing that intelligence isn't rare, it's just suppressed. Most kids aren't lacking potential. They're drowning in structure, in metrics, in noise. The moment I saw that, I knew I couldn't keep pretending school would fix itself. So I built something different. I didn't want another school. I wanted the opposite of school. No grades, no year levels, no fixed curriculum. Just real problems, real thinking, real collaboration. People thought it was crazy, that children need structure, that they need to be told what to learn and when. But that's not structure. That's programming, and it kills the most powerful force in any child, initiative. I didn't want my kids to learn how to be perfect students. I wanted them to learn how to think, how to challenge assumptions, how to find truth through logic, not repetition. I watched them ask better questions when they weren't afraid of being wrong. I saw their eyes light up when they solved something no one had assigned. That's what Ad Astra was built on. Not content, but energy. Not memorization, but momentum. Learning as movement, as creation. Not a performance, but a pursuit. You don't need to teach children how to learn. You just need to stop teaching them how not to. That's the real breakthrough. The system assumes that without control, kids will collapse. But the opposite is true. When you remove the fear, you reveal the fire. They start building, asking, collaborating, leading, not because someone told them to, but because it feels natural. Because curiosity isn't something you install. It's something you protect. And the more I watched that unfold, the more certain I became. The old model isn't broken. It's obsolete. It wasn't built for this world, the world of rapid change, of exponential tech, of complex ethical problems. It was built for predictability, for compliance, for answers, not questions. That's why Ad Astra had to exist, not as a rejection of school, but as a prototype of something better. A place where intelligence isn't measured but multiplied, where students don't memorize what worked, they invent what might. Where learning isn't about performance, it's about process. It's messy, it's chaotic, but it's real. And once you see that kind of learning, you can't go back. You realize the goal isn't to fix the system, it's to outgrow it. They never said it out loud, but it was clear from the beginning. The real curriculum wasn't math or history, it was obedience. Sit still, line up, raise your hand, ask permission. Follow the rules. Speak only when spoken to. Don't argue. Don't interrupt. Don't think too much. These weren't written in any textbook, but they were enforced more strictly than any academic standard. Break a rule, lose a point. Challenge a teacher, get a mark. Think too far outside the box, and suddenly, you're a problem child. That's the hidden syllabus. The part of school no one talks about but everyone absorbs. You're not being taught subjects. You're being taught behavior. Not how to solve problems, but how to follow orders. Not how to think, but how to wait. And the system rewards those who adapt to it fastest, the ones who ask the least, who copy the cleanest, who fit the mold most efficiently. They're called good students. But really, they're just good followers. I saw it over and over. Kids who were brilliant at asking hard questions slowly stopped raising their hands. Not because they became less curious, but because they learned curiosity has a cost. It slows the class down. It makes teachers uncomfortable. It risks the grade. So they stop. They blend in. They memorize instead of explore. And school applauds it. Parents applaud it. Society rewards it. Because obedience is safe, predictable, easy to manage. But it comes with a hidden price. It trains you out of yourself. It suppresses instinct. It rewrites your reflexes. Until hesitation replaces initiative. Until silence feels smarter than wonder. You graduate not as a thinker, but as a rule follower. And in a world that's changing this fast, that's a dangerous kind of smart. Because the rules are outdated. The structures are crumbling. The problems are new. But the students are still trained like factory workers, efficient, quiet, replaceable. The system isn't preparing them for the world. It's preparing them for control, for compliance, for obedience disguised as success. And the most dangerous part is, it feels normal. That's the genius of it. You don't even realize it's happening. You think you're winning. You think good grades mean progress. But sometimes, the better you perform in a broken system, the deeper you sink into the lie. I wasn't the best student. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I couldn't pretend. I couldn't play the game without seeing the strings. And once you see the strings, you can't unsee them. You start to question every rule, every standard, every must. Who wrote it? Who benefits from it? What happens if I don't follow it? These aren't rebellious questions. They're necessary ones. But school doesn't have space for necessary questions. It has scripts. It has rubrics. It has authority. And it teaches you from the start that the only way to succeed is to obey faster than others. That's the real curriculum. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to remember that there was ever another way to learn. The system isn't afraid of ignorance. It's afraid of awareness. It doesn't collapse when people don't know. It collapses when they start asking why. That's why the most dangerous thing a student can do isn't fail a test. It's question the test itself. Who wrote this? What's the point? Why does it matter? Those questions don't fit into the rubric. They don't align with the grading key. They can't be quantified, so they're discouraged. Not because they're wrong, but because they're powerful. Awareness is disruptive. It shifts the center of control. It puts the mind back in the hands of the thinker, and the system can't allow that. It survives on predictability, on repetition, on silence. It needs students who respond, not students who reflect. So it rewards compliance and quietly punishes awareness. I saw it happen all the time. Kids who noticed the flaws got labeled difficult. Kids who asked deeper questions got pushed aside. Not because they were incorrect, but basanate dat, dao, but because that das den das and dao back and das and das and das and das and das and das and dao bas, but they couldn't be contained. There's nothing more threatening to a rigid system than someone who sees the gears, who notices the patterns, who dares to say, "This doesn't make sense." Because once you admit that, you have to change something. And change is chaos to control. So the system doubles down, standardizes harder, narrows the scope, shortens the leash. It tells you the test is everything. The score defines you. The rubric is reality. But deep down, it's scared. Not of failure, but of free thinkers. People who don't just absorb information, but interrogate it. People who can't be manipulated by metrics. People who aren't afraid to sound stupid if it means getting closer to the truth. That kind of thinking is radioactive in a controlled environment. It spreads. It infects. One student asks, why? And suddenly the others start thinking too. That's what the system fears. Not rebellion, not resistance, but awakening. Quiet, calm, logical, awakening. The kind that can't be stopped once it begins. The kind that doesn't need protests or slogans, just one mind refusing to follow a flawed script. I've seen how fast that spreads. One person breaks the pattern, and the illusion starts to crack. It only takes one. That's why awareness is policed more heavily than ignorance. Because an ignorant person is easy to guide. But an awake person asks too many questions. And questions don't fit into the grading system. They don't fit into the job description. They don't fit into the mold. So the system makes sure you stop asking. It gives you prizes for silence, punishments for thinking out loud. And slowly, you start censoring yourself. You start playing safe. Not because you believe in the system, but because you know what happens when you don't. That's the fear it runs on. Not your failure, your awareness. And the only way to break that loop is to ask anyway, even if it makes things messy. Even if no one has the answer, even if the question shakes everything. Because the truth doesn't need to be approved. It just needs to be found. If not school, then what? That's the question everyone asks, as if school is the only way knowledge can flow, as if removing the system means removing the structure, the growth, the future. But maybe that's the problem. We've confused the system with the purpose. School was never the point. Learning was. Growth was. But when the system becomes more important than the purpose, it starts to defend itself, even when it no longer works, especially when it no longer works. The truth is, we've outgrown it. The factory model of education, sit down, stay quiet, memorize, obey, doesn't prepare you for a world where answers are cheap and questions are everything. The old world rewarded obedience. The new world rewards originality. The old world needed workers. The new world needs thinkers, builders, explorers. But the system still trains children like it's 1955, standardized, linear, risk-averse, safe. And when you challenge that, people panic. Because if school isn't the answer, then what is? That fear is real, but so is the opportunity. The truth is, learning never belonged to school. It belongs to anyone willing to ask the next question. To anyone curious enough to find problems worth solving. To anyone brave enough to think without permission. You don't need a diploma to start building. You don't need a classroom to understand the world. You just need the willingness to keep going when there's no script to follow. That's what no one tells you. Learning isn't a place. It's a posture, a way of looking at the world that says, I might not know yet, but I can figure it out. And that posture is more valuable than any curriculum. Because the future won't be built by the best test takers. It'll be built by the best problem solvers. The ones who ask, what if we did this differently? What if we ignored the syllabus and followed the logic? What if we taught ourselves what school forgot? That's the real revolution. Not abandoning education, but reclaiming it. Rebuilding it from first principles, from questions, from initiative. It won't look like school. It'll look like labs, like books, like teams building prototypes in garages, like someone teaching themselves physics at midnight because the question won't let them sleep. That's how I learned. Not to pass, but to understand. Not to compete, but to create. And anyone can do that. Anyone who refuses to wait. For a degree, for approval, for a system to catch up. You don't need permission to learn. You never did. You just needed someone to remind you that the door was never locked. The lock was in your mind. The moment you question it, really question it, it disappears. You were never broken. The system just didn't know what to do with someone who didn't wait for instructions. That's not a flaw. That's the beginning of freedom. If you've made it this far, maybe something inside you has always known. That school was just the surface and you were meant to dig deeper. Not to rebel, but to rebuild. Not to destroy, but to design something better. Initiative isn't noise, it's signal. Curiosity isn't a weakness, it's the core of who we are. And obedience, when left unchecked, becomes a cage with no walls. If this series gave voice to something you've always felt but never put into words, don't let it stop here. Like, share, leave a comment, subscribe to Mind of Musk. We're not just building a channel, we're rewriting the code for how we learn, how we think, how we lead. One thought at a time. And if you're here, it means you're ready. Let's begin.